Hello friends. Before we start today's stories, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment which story you like most, where you're from, and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. When Liam and Marissa Crane moved into 24 Elm Hollow Drive, it wasn't just a new chapter. It was their last chance. They'd sold nearly everything after Liam's startup collapsed. The house, a gray colonial near Burlington, Vermont, was an auction property. Cheap, quiet, too good to be true. Marissa loved how the morning fog curled around the pine trees behind the backyard fence. Liam loved the silence. No neighbors for half a mile. But silence, he'd learn, has its own sound. The first thing they noticed was how the house carried sound. Every word, every footstep echoed faintly, not like normal acoustics, but like something was answering back a half-second later. Marissa laughed the first time she noticed. "It's like the walls are repeating us," Liam frowned. Yeah, weird insulation maybe. But by the third night, when Marissa dropped her mug and it shattered, both of them heard it. The sound of shattering glass again, 2 seconds later, from inside the wall. The next morning, Liam went exploring in the basement, a narrow concrete space with uneven walls. Near the water tank, he found a patch of plaster that looked newer than the rest. When he tapped it, it sounded hollow, as if something large had been sealed inside. Scratched faintly into the plaster were letters. S. Hollow, 1974. He took a photo and sent it to the local property office. The agent texted back within minutes. "That's odd. The house was built in 1999. There's no record of anything older on that land." Marissa had started recording a home renovation vlog. She was editing footage in her office one evening when she noticed something strange. In one clip, filmed from the living room, the air behind her shimmered slightly, like heat distortion, even though the fireplace wasn't lit. She paused the footage, zoomed in. For just a single frame, there was a shape, tall, human-sized, faintly translucent, standing behind her shoulder. When she showed it to Liam, he brushed it off. "Compression glitch, Riss. You've been watching too many ghost TikToks." But when he left the room, she whispered to herself, "Then why was it breathing?" Because in the audio track, barely audible beneath her voice, was a soft, rhythmic inhale. A week later, Liam was working in the attic when he heard Marissa talking downstairs. He smiled. She must have been on a video call again. Then he heard his own voice. "Marissa, can you bring up the drill?" But he hadn't said that. Not yet. He froze, waiting. Seconds later, she called up the stairs. "Liam, need the drill?" The exact same words, the same tone. The house had spoken before either of them did. That night, Marissa woke to a smell, not the old wood scent of the house, but fresh paint. She followed it down the hall to the end of the corridor, where the wallpaper had peeled slightly near the floor. Behind it was a hairline crack. She pressed lightly, and a section of the wall pushed inward, revealing a narrow passage, tall enough for a person to squeeze through. She called out, "Liam!" No response. The passage led into what looked like an old nursery, small and windowless. A single rocking horse sat in the center, painted white but covered in thick dust. On the wall, written faintly in faded crayon, were words. "She lives in the walls." Marissa's voice woke Liam around 5 a.m. She was downstairs, screaming. When he ran into the living room, he saw the floorboards bowing slightly, like something was moving underneath. He grabbed her hand and pulled her back as one of the planks split open, releasing a blast of cold, dusty air. Something like a whisper came from the gap, not words, but fragments. When Liam nailed the floor shut, Marissa refused to go near that side of the room again. The next day, he drove into town and asked about the S. Hollow inscription. The clerk, an older man named Robert Hale, went pale when he saw the photo. "You found that in the basement? Then you've bought the second hollow house." Liam frowned. "Second?" Hale nodded. "The first one stood on the same land until '74, burned down completely. No survivors. Builder's name was Samuel Hollow. He designed houses that could resonate sound. Said he could hear the dead through walls." Liam tried to laugh, but the way Hale looked at him made it impossible. "They said when his family died in that fire, he sealed their voices inside the structure. You can still hear them if the walls remember." When Liam returned home, the house felt different. The air seemed denser, heavier. He called for Marissa. No answer. Then, from the living room, came the sound of her voice. "Up here." He followed it to the stairs, but stopped halfway when he saw that the basement door was open. Her voice came again, but this time it came from inside the wall. "Up! Here!" He leaned closer, heart pounding. "Marissa?" And then, her face appeared faintly beneath the wallpaper, pressing outward from the inside. Mouth open, eyes wide. He tore the wallpaper away. Nothing there, just cold plaster. But her voice whispered again, softer now, directly behind him. "You heard me this time." That night, Liam set up microphones throughout the house, his old sound engineering gear from college. He wanted proof. He left the recorders running and went outside to sleep in the car, just to be sure nothing would interfere. At dawn, he replayed the recordings. The first hour was silence, then static. Then, a woman's voice, faint, strained, echoing as if from inside a tunnel. "We're not inside. You are." Then dozens of overlapping whispers filled the track, voices calling his name, giggling, weeping, humming the same low tune again and again. A pattern emerged, a frequency pulse, repeating every 12 seconds, rising slightly each time, like a heartbeat speeding up. And then, nothing. Until the very end of the recording, where Marissa's voice whispered clearly, "Don't look for me in the walls. Look under them." Liam didn't sleep that night. Marissa's last recorded words, "Look under them," looped endlessly in his head. By sunrise, he dragged a crowbar and flashlight into the basement. The air down there was thicker now, like the humidity had been replaced by something heavier, the scent of wet iron and old rot. He found the spot with the faint S. Hollow 1974 mark and pried the plaster away. It cracked easily, as if the wall wanted to open. Behind it wasn't insulation or wiring, but soil. Raw, packed dirt, almost black, and sticking out from it, a finger bone. He stumbled back, hitting his head against the pipe. The shock passed quickly, replaced by a grim determination. He began to dig. The deeper he went, the more the air buzzed, a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate through his teeth. Every scoop of dirt revealed something new: a child's shoe, a broken clock, a strip of wallpaper with faded drawings. Then his shovel hit wood. It wasn't a coffin, it was a door. Horizontal, sealed into the ground. A rusted handle jutted from it, engraved faintly with the same initials. SH. Liam pulled, and the door lifted with a slow groan, releasing a gust of air so cold it burned his lungs. Below was a narrow set of steps descending into pitch blackness. He turned on his flashlight and froze. The walls down there weren't made of stone or wood. They were lined with plaster molds of human faces, hundreds of them, men, women, children, each mouth open in a silent scream, and behind them, faint movement. The surface pulsed. He reached out with the light and saw, for just a second, the plaster flex, like breathing skin. He stepped down cautiously, recording with his phone. The basement floor opened into a chamber, circular, maybe 30 feet wide, with cables running through the walls. Old speakers, rusted microphones, and mechanical recorders lay in piles around the perimeter. And in the center stood a massive wooden pillar with speakers embedded into it, some decades old, others modern. On the base, written in faded ink, was a phrase, "The house that remembers sound." Liam's breath caught. He realized then what Samuel Hollow had built. Not just a house, but a resonant body. A structure that recorded everything, every whisper, every death, every scream. As he circled the pillar, the hum deepened. He switched off the flashlight, and the room didn't go dark. The walls were faintly glowing from within, thin cracks of white light, tracing the outlines of those faces. And one of them, near the pillar, began to move its lips. Liam. He froze. "Marissa." "It's not her voice anymore," another whispered. Dozens of mouths began to twitch and murmur, layering over one another, crying, laughing, whispering. The sound wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was inside his skull, resonating in his bones. He covered his ears and screamed, but the sound didn't stop. Instead, it formed words. Hundreds of overlapping sentences merging into one unified tone. The house listens. The house learns. The house repeats. On the central pillar, an old analog recorder clicked on. Static. Then a man's voice, dry, formal, trembling. "Samuel Hollow, June 3rd, 1974. Phase 7. The structure accepts vibration. Memory persists beyond frequency. The dead are not gone. They echo." The tape continued, voice shaking with excitement. "Marion and the children are here now. Their sound stays. I will join them soon. Then the house will never forget." Then a loud crash on the tape, flames roaring, screams, and silence. Liam stared at the recorder, frozen. He realized Hollow hadn't just trapped his family's voices, he'd trapped their souls. Something moved in the far corner, a faint shifting of dirt. He turned the light toward it. Marissa was standing there. She looked pale, half translucent, dust covering her hair and clothes. Her eyes shimmered faintly, hollow and glowing like the cracks in the wall. "You shouldn't have come down here," she whispered. Liam ran toward her, reaching out, but his hand passed through hers like fog. "I told you," she said. "The walls are full." Behind her, the faces on the plaster began to press outward, mouths opening, eyes widening. The hum deepened again, so loud the walls shook. "Liam," she said, "you have to finish what he started." The chamber walls began to crack apart, revealing veins of light threading through the foundation, like nerves through a living body. The sound grew unbearable, a steady, inhuman vibration. Liam dropped to his knees, clutching his head. His phone camera was still recording, and in the footage, the light from the wall seemed to crawl up his skin. Voices surrounded him, whispering, begging, singing. He screamed, but it only made the sound stronger, feeding it. The light spread faster. His reflection appeared faintly on the pillar, and then, slowly, his face began to sink into the wood. Marissa stepped closer, eyes sad. He always needed one to keep it alive. 3 days later, The police arrived after a neighbor reported hearing strange music from underground. The cranes were gone. All they found was Liam's phone lying on the basement floor. The final video showed the walls trembling as a man's voice, his own voice, whispered, "I can hear you listening." And then, faintly, a woman's laugh echoed after. The footage ended with static. But if you listen closely, buried deep in the recording, you can still hear the heartbeat-like hum of the Hollow House. Some say it's still there, off Elm Hollow Drive, sealed behind new plaster and sold again last spring. And when the new owners move in, the first thing they'll hear won't be the wind. It'll be the house breathing them in. When Claire and Noah Winters moved to Ravenbrook, Maine, they weren't looking for a dream home. They were looking for a quiet place to start over. After the death of their newborn son, they'd sold everything and driven north until the GPS lost signal. That's when they found it. A lonely, 3-story Victorian house perched on the edge of a frozen lake. It wasn't listed anywhere. No "for sale" sign. Just an envelope nailed to the front door with 2 words, "For you." They should have turned around right then. But the house, pale gray, steep roof, tall windows, had something magnetic about it. The kind of beauty that pulls you in before you realize you've stopped breathing. Inside, everything was untouched. Furniture under white sheets, a thick layer of dust, and the faint scent of lavender that didn't belong in such cold air. "Feels like someone just left," Noah said quietly. Claire nodded, running her fingers along the banister. "Or like they're coming back." Still, by evening, they'd unpacked. By nightfall, the fog from the lake had swallowed the entire property, wrapping it in silver silence. The second floor had 5 rooms. 4 were ice cold. But the last one, at the very end of the hallway, stayed warm. Even with the heating off, the air inside carried a soft, pleasant heat. A fire had long been dead in the old brick fireplace, yet the room still radiated warmth, like someone had just been sitting there. Claire decided to make it her art studio. That night, she set up her easel and painted until the clock hit midnight. Noah was asleep downstairs, but Claire swore she could hear footsteps pacing just outside the door. Slow, deliberate. She opened it once. Nothing. Just the quiet hallway stretching into darkness. When she turned back to her canvas, she froze. She'd been painting the view from the window, the lake and the trees. But now, reflected in the painted glass, there was a person standing behind her. A faint, pale shape, blurred, featureless. When she looked up from the canvas, the room was empty. By the 3rd day, Noah noticed something odd about the house's layout. From the outside, there were 8 windows on the front face, but from the inside, only 7. He measured the walls, checked each room, every corridor. The missing space didn't make sense, like a piece of the house existed only from the outside. That evening, he went around back and stared up at the exterior wall. The 8th window was there, on the 2nd floor, far left corner, faintly glowing from within. Except there was no room there. He stood in the freezing wind, staring. Then the curtains behind that phantom window slowly closed. The next morning, Claire woke up to the sound of the landline ringing downstairs. They didn't have a landline. Still half asleep, she picked it up. The voice on the other end was faint, female and trembling. "Don't move the furniture." Claire froze. "Who is this? Please, don't change anything. He doesn't like that." The line went dead. When Noah came down, she told him. He searched for a phone jack, found none. The receiver wasn't even plugged in. While cleaning out a desk in the study, Noah found a letter tucked under the drawer lining. The paper was yellowed, but the ink looked fresh. It read, "If you're reading this, you've already let the house notice you. Do not speak to it. Do not thank it. And whatever you do, never use the upstairs fireplace. The warmth isn't kindness, it's memory." There was no name, just a shaky signature that looked like it started with an M. Noah laughed nervously and showed it to Claire. Probably someone's creepy prank. But that night, she woke up shivering, even though the heater was on high. The only warm room in the house now was the one at the end of the hallway, the one she'd been using. By the fifth night, Claire's paintings began to change. She'd painted the lake in morning light, calm and blue. But when she came back the next morning, it had turned gray. The trees in the reflection looked wrong, twisted, their shapes unfamiliar. When she started a new piece, a portrait of the house itself, her brush moved without her realizing. When she stepped back, she saw that she'd painted herself standing in the upstairs window, the one that didn't exist. Her reflection in the window of her painting stared at her, mouth slightly open, as if whispering something she couldn't yet hear. Noah couldn't shake the feeling that the house was changing shape. Every morning, the hallway seemed slightly longer, the corners a little sharper. One afternoon, while fixing a flickering light in the kitchen, he dropped a screwdriver. It rolled toward the far wall and disappeared into it. When he pressed the panel, it gave way with a hollow creak. Behind it was a door, hidden behind the drywall, sealed shut with dozens of old nails. He called Claire over. Together, they pried it open. A narrow staircase led downward, not to the basement, but deeper, below the foundation. The smell of iron and old wood drifted upward. "Maybe it's just storage," Noah said, though his voice betrayed him. Claire shone her flashlight down. The beam didn't reach the bottom. "It's not storage," she whispered. "It's waiting." That night, Noah went outside to the lake, trying to clear his head. The water was completely still. So still it looked like glass. When he leaned forward, he saw his reflection perfectly. Then, slowly, another reflection appeared behind his, Claire's. But she wasn't at the lake. He turned back toward the house. The upstairs light in her studio was off. When he looked back at the water, the reflection was still there. Only now, Claire's reflection was smiling. And in the mirrored surface of the lake, the house looked different. Darker, older, as if it had rotted decades ago. Claire began hearing humming from inside the walls, soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby. She traced it to the fireplace in her studio. The sound was faint, but behind the bricks, she saw something carved, a name etched into the stone with blackened soot. Michael Winters. Her heart stopped. Their baby's name. She screamed for Noah, but when he came running, the name was gone. The bricks were clean, untouched. She didn't tell him what she'd seen. 2 nights later, during a thunderstorm, the power went out. They lit candles and sat in silence, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Then, a slow exhale filled the room. Not from either of them, from the walls themselves. The candle flames bent toward the center of the room, drawn by the inhale that followed. Then another. The house was breathing. When lightning flashed, the shadows on the walls pulsed in rhythm with the sound, like veins expanding and contracting. And from upstairs, they both heard the faint crackle of a fire starting. Noah grabbed a flashlight and rushed up the stairs. The air grew hotter with every step. When he reached the end of the hallway, he stopped. The studio door was half open, light flickering inside. The fireplace was burning on its own, flames twisting unnaturally, curling upward in spirals that didn't cast smoke or heat, only light that moved. In that glow, he saw dozens of faint handprints on the walls, pressed outward from inside the plaster, and on the floor, a small shape made of ash, the outline of a crib. He stepped forward. The fire roared louder, and a woman's whisper filled the air. "You brought him home." The door slammed behind him. Claire tried to open the studio door, but it wouldn't budge. The wood under her fingers felt warm, alive. Inside, Noah's voice was shouting her name. Then, silence. The warmth drained from the door, replaced by a cold so sharp it made her hands numb. When she finally forced it open, the room was empty. The fire was gone. The painting of the house had changed again. Now, in the window of the painted house, Noah was standing, looking out at her. And behind him, in the painted reflection, their baby's crib was on fire. The next morning, Noah barely spoke. He sat at the kitchen counter, staring into his coffee cup like he was afraid of what was waiting in the house below their feet. The sound that started as a faint hollow knock last night was still there. Quieter, but steady. It seemed to come from deep within the house, like something hidden beneath the walls was trying to make itself heard. Claire tried to convince herself it was just plumbing, or wood shifting, or anything remotely logical. But the truth was simple and terrifying. The house wasn't just making noise. The house was listening back. By midday, Noah returned to the basement. He had a flashlight and a hammer clutched tightly in his hands. The far corner of the basement, where the damp black stain had grown overnight, hummed softly, a low vibration he could feel in his chest. He knocked on the wall once. The echo didn't sound solid. It came back delayed, like the sound had to travel down a long tunnel before returning. His gut tightened. Something was behind that wall. With steady hands, he pried the wooden panels away. The old wood cracked like brittle bone, releasing a stale breath of air that smelled like wet earth. Behind the wall was a narrow crawl space, barely 2 feet wide, and at the far end of that crawl space was something he didn't expect to see. A small iron door, not modern, not decorative. It was bolted shut from the outside, its surface scarred with scratches and smeared with a dark, rust-like stain. Noah didn't tell Claire about it that day. That night, she claimed she couldn't sleep because of the strange, cold air moving through the house. She said it felt like the house was breathing. At 2:45 a.m., the humming returned, louder now, vibrating through the floors. Claire bolted upright in bed, heart racing. Picture frames rattled. The lamps flickered. Down the hall, Noah stood staring at the basement door. Beneath it, a faint orange glow pulsed softly, like the heartbeat of something alive. Then the door slowly creaked open on its own. A freezing wind pushed up from below, and beneath it, the steady beat. Thump, thump, thump. "Noah," Claire whispered from the stairs. "Please, don't go down there." But he already was. Each wooden step groaned beneath his feet. When he reached the bottom, the light bulb above him flickered violently, then burst with a sharp crack. His flashlight beam landed on the far wall. The iron door was now wide open. The air inside the crawlspace moved unnaturally, not like a draft, but like something breathing back. Noah crouched, shining the flashlight into the narrow tunnel. A crude passage extended downward, carved unevenly into stone and dirt. Moisture clung to the walls, dripping slowly onto the ground. And somewhere deep in the darkness, thump, thump, thump. The sound was clearer now. It wasn't pipes. It wasn't wood. It was a heartbeat. "Noah!" Claire shouted from upstairs. "The lights! Something's wrong!" Every light in the house flickered violently. The refrigerator hummed out of rhythm, matching the pulse from below. Claire stumbled into the hallway, clutching the wall as the house vibrated around her. In the basement, Noah's heart pounded as he crawled deeper into the tunnel. The walls grew narrower, the heartbeat louder. After about 10 feet, he reached a metal grate in the ground. Below it was a dark, liquid surface, not water. It pulsed. A slow, rhythmic rise and fall, like the chest of something enormous breathing. Then, a whisper, directly beside his ear. "Do you hear it too?" Noah scrambled backward, scraping his arms on the rough stone, gasping for air. The heartbeat stopped. The tunnel fell silent. He slammed the iron door shut, dragged an old shelf against it, and stumbled upstairs. Claire stood pale and shaking in the kitchen, watching the ceiling crack slightly near the beams. The entire house seemed to exhale, walls stretching, wood groaning like ribs around a set of invisible lungs. That was the last night they spent inside the hollow roadhouse. The next morning, they packed a single bag, left everything else behind, and drove to a cheap roadside motel 30 miles away. Neither spoke for hours. Later that day, Noah called the county records office, desperate for any explanation. A clerk emailed him old documents. One was a blueprint from 1912, showing a farmhouse built over what used to be a drainage shaft. The other was a police report from 1965. Local residents report low-frequency noise under property. Deputies locate sub-level cistern. One officer reports sensation of ground breathing. Investigation abandoned after partial collapse. Noah stared at the words, his hand trembling. "That's what's under our house," he whispered. 3 days later, they returned to grab whatever they could. The house stood in eerie silence, but in the basement, the shelf blocking the crawlspace door was toppled. The small iron door was open again, and in the dust on the floor was a deep handprint. Too long, too narrow to be human. Noah didn't go closer. He closed the basement door, locked it, and walked out without looking back. That night at the motel, Claire woke with a start. The room was cold. The glass of water on the nightstand was trembling, rippling like something beneath the floor was moving. Thump, thump, thump. She turned to Noah. He was already awake, sitting upright, his face pale in the dim light. "It followed us," he whispered. They never returned to Hollow Road. Months later, the house appeared on the market again. Different owners, same address. And beneath that house, somewhere in the dark earth, something still breathes. When Daniel and Lily Meyer bought the house at 341 Hollister Lane in Vermont, they thought it was the perfect escape. After years of city noise and chaos, they wanted silence, something peaceful, remote, surrounded by nature. The house seemed ideal. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a view of the forest that stretched for miles. Even better, the price was suspiciously low for the area. The realtor called it a motivated sale. Daniel didn't ask why. He just signed the papers. But by their second night, the silence they'd longed for began to feel wrong. It wasn't normal quiet. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, thick and heavy. Even the forest outside seemed dead. No crickets, no owls, no wind. On their first evening, Lily noticed the house made no sound at all. No creaks, no hum of pipes, not even the faint tick of the thermostat. Just complete, suffocating silence. When she mentioned it, Daniel smiled. That's what we wanted, right? Peace. But peace doesn't feel like that. It feels calm. This felt watched. By the third day, Daniel started hearing something faint at night. Not voices, not movement, just a sound like distant murmuring numbers. It wasn't from outside. It came from inside the walls. 7, 4, 9. He'd jolt awake, heart pounding, certain he was dreaming. But every time, the whisper would fade the second he sat up. He never told Lily. A week later, while unpacking boxes in the basement, Lily found a metal plate bolted into the concrete wall. It was square, about the size of a notebook, with a small keypad built into it. Old. Rusted. No markings except one word etched faintly across the top. Calibration. She called Daniel down. Did you see this when we moved in? He shook his head. Maybe some old electrical system. The keypad still had faint red lights glowing behind the buttons. They weren't connected to any visible wires. Lily pressed one. Nothing happened. Then Daniel noticed something strange. On the concrete just beneath the panel were faint scratches, like someone had tried to carve numbers into the floor. 4, 1, 9, 7. He frowned. Weird. Lily laughed nervously. Maybe a code? The keypad gave a single soft click. That night, the whisper returned. Clearer this time. Not murmuring. Counting. We're in 1097. Daniel sat up in bed, the sound pulsing softly like static electricity in the air. He looked toward the wall. It wasn't coming from inside his head this time. He could hear it moving behind the drywall, traveling along the length of the hallway, whispering those same 4 numbers again and again. 4, 1, 9, 7, 4, 1, 9. Then silence. Total silence. The kind that made his skin crawl. The next morning, Lily found Daniel sitting in the living room, staring at his phone. He'd been searching for the property's history. Nothing unusual showed up. Just ownership records dating back to 1973, when the house was first built by someone named Dr. Lionel Harp. The name didn't mean much until they found an old metal tag inside one of the kitchen drawers, stamped with the same name. Harp Laboratories. Lily frowned. Was this place a lab or something? Daniel shrugged. Maybe he worked from home. But something about it didn't sit right, especially when they realized the keypad in the basement had begun to glow brighter. The next morning, Lily found Daniel sitting in the living room, staring at his phone. He'd been searching for the property's history. Nothing unusual showed up, just ownership records dating back to 1973, when the house was first built by someone named Dr. Lionel Harp. The name didn't mean much until they found an old metal tag inside one of the kitchen drawers, stamped with the same name. Harp Laboratories. Lily frowned. Was this place a lab or something? Daniel shrugged. Maybe he worked from home. But something about it didn't sit right, especially when they realized the keypad in the basement had begun to glow brighter. That evening, Lily came running upstairs, pale-faced. Daniel, come look at this. She pointed at the small hallway outside the guest bedroom. On the wallpaper, faint, almost invisible in the dim light, someone had written numbers. Not drawn with a pen or pencil, but burned into the surface, like the wallpaper itself had been scorched from within. 4,197. The same 4 numbers. Daniel reached out to touch it, but before his fingers brushed the wall, The digits flickered faintly, as if reacting to him. Then they disappeared. By now, sleep was impossible. Every night, the whispers grew louder, sometimes from the vents, sometimes from under the floor, always repeating, 4, 1, 9, 7. Daniel finally decided to record it. He set his phone on the nightstand, audio recorder running all night. When he checked the file the next morning, the waveform showed something strange. The sound wasn't just random noise. The whispering voice came at exact 47-second intervals, repeating the same pattern every time. And behind it, a faint hum. A mechanical one, like something running beneath the house. That night, Daniel couldn't resist any longer. He went down to the basement, flashlight in hand, staring at the keypad. The red light was blinking now, once every 47 seconds. His phone in one hand, he whispered to himself, 4, 1, 9, 7. He pressed the numbers. The red light froze. Then came a sound like a soft exhale from the wall. He waited. Nothing. No mechanical noise. No click. Just a long pause. And then, a faint voice, right behind his ear. Calibrated. The basement lights went out. The next morning, Daniel didn't remember how he got back to bed. Lily said she found him sleepwalking around 3 a.m., standing near the basement door, whispering something under his breath. When she asked what, he just said, "We're in the wrong coordinates." The next morning, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his coffee. Lily watched him from across the counter. He hadn't spoken a word since dawn. The air inside the house felt heavier, as if the walls had absorbed the weight of everything that had happened the night before. He finally looked up. "The numbers," he whispered. "They're everywhere." Lily frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel turned his laptop toward her. The architectural program he used to design houses was open, and across the blueprints of their new home, dozens of numbers had appeared on their own, glowing faintly in red. 19.4.7, 0.19.4, 0.7.19.4, 0.7. They pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. "I didn't type them," he said, voice shaking. "They just appeared." Lily copied the numbers onto paper. Her instinct as a teacher kicked in. Patterns, repetition, sequencing. When she broke them into sets of 3, each sequence matched the dimensions of specific rooms in the house. "It's like coordinates," she muttered, "or measurements of something inside the walls." Daniel zoomed in on the blueprint, tracing the numbers' alignment. Every pattern led to a single point, the wall behind the staircase, where he had first heard the strange clicking sound. He grabbed his tools and began to chip away the plaster. Lily stood beside him, holding the flashlight. Dust filled the air. After several minutes, the chisel struck something metallic. Daniel's pulse quickened. He cleared away more debris until a small iron panel appeared, bolted into the frame. Etched into the metal were the same numbers, arranged in a spiral. He pried it open. Inside, there was a small brass box, tarnished, heavy, and locked with a dial engraved with digits. Lily stared. "It's a code box." Daniel hesitated only a moment before turning the dial. 19, 4, 7. The lid clicked open. Inside were 3 things: a yellowed photograph, a folded note, and an object wrapped in black cloth. The photograph showed their house, but decades earlier. 5 people stood on the porch, faces blurred with age, and one of them looked exactly like Daniel. Daniel's hands trembled as he unfolded the note. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. "To the next ones. If you hear them, it means you've already begun. The numbers are not random. They're memories. The house records everything and replays what it cannot forget. Don't listen for too long, Lily's voice cracked. What does that mean? Daniel didn't answer. He reached for the object wrapped in cloth. When he opened it, a small reel-to-reel audio tape fell into his palm. The label read, "Hollow Sequence, 1964. He carried it to his workshop, where he kept an old tape player. The reel hissed as it spun. Then a man's voice filled the room. Test 4. Daniel responds well to acoustic retention. He repeats the sequence without prompting. 19, 4, 7. Daniel's blood went cold. Did you hear that? He whispered. He said my name. Lily stared at him, pale. How is that possible? This tape is 60 years old. The voice on the recording continued, lower, shaking now. It remembers too much. The sound. It's rewriting him. The tape screeched, then cut off. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room, staring at the wall where the panel had been. Every few minutes, he could hear the clicking again. But now it wasn't random. It had rhythm, like code being tapped out in the dark. He grabbed his notebook and began writing the sequence. After half an hour, his hand froze. He realized the numbers now formed his and Lily's birthdays, alternating in patterns. He looked up at the wall. Are you recording us? He whispered. From upstairs, Lily screamed. Daniel ran up the stairs 2 at a time. The bedroom door was open. The wallpaper peeled at the corners like it was breathing. Lily stood frozen, staring at the mirror above the dresser. It's showing something, she said, her voice trembling. Daniel stepped beside her. In the reflection, the room looked different, darker, older, and there was someone else standing exactly where Daniel was. The same face, the same clothes, but older. The reflection turned its head slowly and whispered, 19, 4, 7. The lights blew out. When morning came, Daniel found Lily sitting outside on the porch, still shaken. I think this house was built for something else, she said quietly. She showed him an old newspaper she had found in one of the attic boxes. The headline read, Local Professor Missing After Memory Experiment, 1964. The article described Dr. Norman Vexler, a researcher who believed that emotional energy could be stored in architecture through sound frequencies. His last known project, a property at 119 Hollow Road. Lily looked at Daniel. That's this house. They went back inside. Everywhere they stepped, faint vibrations echoed through the floorboards. Like the heartbeat of the house itself, Daniel knelt, placing his ear against the wood. He could hear whispering beneath the boards, not random voices, but his own voice, repeating the numbers. By evening, the whispers grew louder. The house hummed like a machine warming up. Every wall vibrated with a low, constant tone, a deep frequency that rattled the windows. Daniel ran to the basement, shouting for Lily to stay upstairs. The source of the sound was coming from behind a bricked section of the wall. He smashed it open. Behind the bricks was a small, windowless room, lined with old recording devices, reels, and microphones, sealed into the plaster. At the center stood a single chair facing the wall. On it sat an old tape recorder, still spinning. Daniel pressed, stop. The hum ceased instantly. For a moment, the silence was deafening. Then, from the recorder speaker, his own voice echoed back. Don't listen for too long. The door behind him slammed shut. He turned the handle, but it wouldn't move. The walls began to pulse again, faster now, the same pattern. 19, 4, 7. Upstairs, Lily felt the floor tremble. She called Daniel's name. No reply. When she ran to the basement, the light switch didn't work. She grabbed her phone's flashlight and stepped down the stairs. The air was cold, metallic. At the bottom, she froze. The section of wall Daniel had broken open was sealed again, completely smooth, no sign of bricks or dust. She pressed her ear against it. On the other side, she could hear Daniel's voice, whispering the same numbers over and over. 19, 4, 7, 19, 4, 7. Daniel, she screamed, pounding the wall. The whispering stopped. Then, faintly, through the wood, his voice whispered back. It remembers us now. The basement light flickered once, and the wall behind her cracked. A wave of cold air pushed past her, carrying the faint scent of old dust and iron. When she turned around, the stairs were gone. Weeks later, the hollow roadhouse went up for sale again. The real estate agent walked through with a new couple, smiling brightly. Built in the 1940s, she said. Solid structure. Just needs some cosmetic work. In the living room, the husband noticed faint numbers scratched into the wall behind the staircase. 19.4.7, he murmured. Weird. The agent laughed it off. Probably just an old marking from the builders. But when they reached the basement, he stopped again. The air was colder down there, and faintly, beneath the hum of the pipes, there was a soft, steady tapping. Tap, tap, tap. 19, 4, 7. When Laura and Ben Morris bought the small riverside home in Salem, Oregon, it felt like a fresh start after years of city chaos. They had saved every dollar they could after Ben lost his job at the factory, and when they found the old 2-story wooden house listed for barely half its value, they couldn't believe their luck. The real estate agent, a woman with trembling hands and too much perfume, had tried to sound cheerful. It's been empty for a while, she said, forcing a smile. The last owners left suddenly. But the view, the view is beautiful. And it was. The Willamette River flowed right behind the property. From the upstairs bedroom window, Laura could see the fog roll in at dawn, hovering low over the gray water like a living thing. The first night, though, the river didn't feel peaceful. It sounded alive. The wind carried whispers through the reeds, soft and strange, as if voices were trapped under the surface, waiting for someone to listen. They settled in quickly. Ben worked nights at a nearby auto shop, while Laura spent her days cleaning, gardening, and exploring the rooms. Most of the furniture came with the house: antique chairs, faded rugs, and a grandfather clock that refused to tick. But what Laura loved most was the viewing room, a narrow room at the back of the house, facing the river through large glass windows that curved slightly outward. The previous owners had built it as a sunroom, though the light that came through was always pale and cold, no matter the hour. Every morning, Laura would make coffee and stand in that room, watching the mist drift over the water. Every morning, she thought she saw movement, like someone standing at the far edge of the riverbank. Sometimes tall, sometimes hunched, always still. On the 7th day, something changed. She found muddy footprints inside the viewing room. They led from the glass door to the center of the rug, then vanished halfway across the floor. Ben swore he hadn't come in that morning. Probably just the movers, he said, or your imagination. You've been stressed lately, but Laura knew better. The mud was wet, fresh, and it smelled faintly of rot. That night, while Ben worked late, Laura sat in the viewing room again. The clock in the hallway had stopped at 2:47 a.m. hours ago. Rain lashed the glass, and she could hear the river below, churning louder than usual, like a storm inside the earth. Then the window fogged up, slowly, from the outside. Laura leaned forward, staring. She traced the condensation with her finger, and froze when she saw a handprint appear on the other side of the glass. Long fingers, wide palm, pressed right where her face had been seconds ago. She gasped and stumbled back, the coffee mug shattering on the floor. But when she ran for the light switch, the handprint was gone. The next morning, Ben found her staring at the window, pale and silent. "Laura," he said carefully, "I think this house is getting to you. You need to get out during the day, meet people, do something normal." So she tried. She visited the local grocery store, made small talk with the cashier, and even went to a church sale where an old woman asked where she lived. When Laura said, "Riverside Drive," the woman froze. Then she whispered, "Oh, you bought that house? What do you mean?" The woman leaned in closer. "They never found them," she said. "The last family. They went missing after the floods. Police said the river took them, but the bodies, they never came up." That night, Laura couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard water dripping, not from the roof, but from inside the house. At 3 a.m., she followed the sound downstairs. The viewing room door was open. A faint, bluish light shimmered across the floorboards, like moonlight reflecting off waves. The glass windows were covered in moisture again, and behind them, she saw silhouettes standing in the fog. Not one, not two, 4 of them. She could make out their shapes. 2 adults, 2 smaller figures, a family. Just standing there, inches from the glass, unmoving. "Ben," she whispered. But when she turned, he wasn't there. The next morning, she told him everything. The footprints, the handprint, the people. Ben sighed. "Look, Laura, there's got to be a logical explanation. Maybe it's the neighbors, maybe some teenagers messing around. But there are no houses for half a mile," she said. "You saw the woods yourself." He didn't answer. That night, Ben set up a small security camera facing the viewing room window. They went to bed uneasy, but hopeful that by morning they'd have proof. When Ben checked the footage, though, the screen was black. The camera had recorded all night, sound only, and the only thing captured was the sound of water, splashing footsteps, and a woman's voice whispering, "Let us in." That evening, Ben disconnected the camera. He looked shaken, though he tried not to show it. "Maybe we should go for a few days," he said. "Take a break. Clear our heads." Laura nodded, but when they packed their bags, she noticed something odd. The viewing room rug, the one with the muddy prints, was soaked through again. The smell of river water filled the air, and somewhere, faintly, she heard that same dripping sound, moving down the hall. Ben couldn't shake the sound from the recording, that faint voice saying, "Let us in." He tried to tell himself it was wind distortion or an animal by the river, but deep down he knew it wasn't. The way it said those words, slow, soaked, and human. For the next 2 nights, they both slept upstairs with the bedroom door locked, but the sound of dripping water followed them everywhere, inside the walls, under the bed, even in their dreams. By the 4th night, the dripping turned into footsteps, wet, squelching footsteps. Laura woke first. The sound was coming up the stairs. Step, step, pause. She reached for Ben's arm, but he wasn't beside her. Her breath caught. "Ben?" she whispered. No answer. She climbed out of bed, feet trembling on the cold wood. The hallway light flickered, casting brief flashes on the peeling wallpaper. Halfway down the hall, she saw a dark trail, like wet footprints leading toward the viewing room. Ben was standing there when she found him, frozen in front of the window. The glass was completely fogged, but his reflection showed his face. Pale, lips trembling. Ben. He didn't turn. "Do you see them?" he said softly. Laura's chest tightened. She looked. Through the fog, faintly, shapes moved behind the glass again. 4 of them. 2 adults. 2 children. They stood in the mist, only outlines visible, their heads slightly tilted toward the house. "They're waiting," Ben whispered. "Every night they get closer." Laura grabbed his arm, yanking him away from the window. "Don't look at them!" she cried, but Ben's eyes stayed locked forward. "They want to come in," he said. "We can't ignore them forever." The next day, she called the real estate agent, the one who had sold them the house. When Laura mentioned the strange things happening, the woman went silent. Finally, she said, "Mrs. Morris, there's something I should have told you before." "What?" "The previous owners, the Harpers, they weren't taken by the river. The police said that, yes, but the truth is, the rescue team found the boat. Empty. And the front door of this house was open. But their clothes, their shoes, were still inside. Everything was untouched. It was like they just walked out into the water." Laura's throat tightened. "Walked out?" "Yes," the woman said softly, like they heard something calling them. That evening, Laura begged Ben to leave, but he refused. "I'm not running because of shadows," he said. "Whatever's happening here, we'll fix it." So he decided to drain the crawl space under the house. It had been damp since they moved in. Maybe the moisture, the smell, the noises were all connected. He spent the next morning down there, working by flashlight. Hours later, he climbed out, drenched and shaking. "What's wrong?" Laura asked. He didn't answer at first. Then he said quietly, "There's a door down there." The crawl space had been sealed with boards, but beneath the mud and moss, Ben had found a small iron door built into the concrete foundation. It wasn't on any of the blueprints. He pried it open with a crowbar. A smell hit them instantly, river water and decay. They shone the flashlight inside. Steps led downward into dark water that rippled slowly, as if something had just moved below the surface. "It connects to the river," Ben murmured. "But why would anyone build this?" They heard something shift below, a splash. Then, a child's giggle. Ben dropped the flashlight. That night, neither of them spoke. The door to the crawl space was nailed shut again, but the smell of river water lingered in every room. Laura lay awake, listening, waiting for the sound. At 2:47 a.m., it came, the whisper, right by her ear. "Let us in!" She bolted upright. The bedroom window was fogged over, from the inside this time. When she wiped it clear, she saw her reflection, but behind it, faintly, a second reflection of a woman. Pale, dripping wet, with empty eyes. Laura screamed. Ben came running, flashlight in hand. He saw nothing. But when he turned toward the hallway, wet footprints were forming across the floorboards, step by step, leading toward the stairs. And then they heard it. From below the house, the sound of rushing water. Like the river had burst through the foundation. Ben grabbed Laura's arm. "Out! Now!" They ran down the hall, but the front door wouldn't open. The handle twisted uselessly, as if rusted shut. Behind them, The viewing room glass shattered. Water gushed in, flooding the floor, cold and dark. Through the broken window, the fog figure stepped inside. 2 adults, 2 children. Soaked. Silent. Their eyes glowed faintly blue. Laura and Ben backed away, but the water rose fast, reaching their knees. The tallest figure, a man, lifted his hand and pointed toward the floor. Laura followed his gesture and saw that the current wasn't coming from the river anymore. It was rising from the house itself. The next thing Laura remembered was waking up on the riverbank, soaked and shivering. Dawn light shimmered over the water. The house stood silent behind her. Windows cracked, front door open. "Ben," she whispered. No reply. She stumbled to her feet, calling his name, but only the sound of rushing water answered. When she looked down, she saw muddy footprints leading from the river, back into the house. She followed them, trembling, until she reached the viewing room. Everything was dry again. No water, no broken glass, only the smell of damp wood and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock, the one that hadn't worked since they moved in. It was ticking now, loud and steady. She turned toward it and froze. Inside the clock's glass case, half submerged in black water, was Ben's reflection, staring back at her. That afternoon, neighbors saw smoke rising from the riverside house. By the time firefighters arrived, it was gone, swallowed by the riverbank as if it had never been there. No trace of Ben or Laura Morris was ever found. Only the faint sound of dripping water beneath the ruins and a broken camera washed up downstream, its last recording filled with the sound of rain and a woman's voice whispering, "We let them in.